My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Dan Diephouse, Jeanne Feldkamp. It's July 7th, 2025, and we're at the Corollary Wines Tasting Room in Amity. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and welcome back to the interview.
Thank you.
We spoke with you in 2020 just as Corollary was getting started, so we're going to kind of start at that point. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about the genesis of Corollary. What caused you to want to create a wine project here in Oregon?
Well, we came into the wine industry from the consumer side. We both used to work in the tech industry, and so our sort of like exposure to wine ahead of being in the wine industry was really just enjoying it. And so we spent a lot of time trying different wines and tasting things and having dinner parties and doing pairings. And so that was sort of where it started. But we, over the years, found ourselves getting more and more kind of going down the rabbit hole, like learning more about the process and visiting producers when we went on vacations. And we also spent a lot of time traveling up to the Willamette Valley, so I grew up in Beaverton and my parents still live there. So we would come out wine tasting around the valley when we visited. And we just started getting curious about the fact that we weren't really seeing much traditional method sparkling. There was Argyle at the time. This is like 2010, 2011, but we didn't see much at the time.
Yeah, a handful of others, but very small production.
So it was a slow evolution, but we started eventually thinking about making our exit from the tech world and thinking about kind of what would be worth spending decades of our lives working on. Wine seemed like a big enough thing to get into, farming is, I think, an important thing. I think it's and wine particularly is one of the sort of like paths that most people have into farming. It's like one of the places where they start to see that food and beverages come from land. And so it started feeling more important to me to work on that side of it. I think we also started getting excited about the opportunity for expanding Willamette Valley sparkling.
Yeah, there's just so much potential here. The whole idea behind Corollary is we've got, the perfect climate here. We've got the right varieties planted. We've got amazing farmers. And increasingly now we've got the expertise to make just world-class sparkling. So hopefully, the corollary of that is some great sparkling wine that really speaks to the place that we're in. And so we just started noodling on that idea and researching it and never reached a point where it sounded like a bad idea. And so next thing we knew, 2017, we moved up here and started Corollary.
We actually kind of have talked a little bit about the fact that there wasn't a point where we decided, yes, we're going to do this. It was just sort of like each little decision happened and all of a sudden we have a moving truck. And so, we got here the day of the total eclipse in August 2017. We timed it so we could be here to see it. And then we just rolled into harvest and did our first harvest in 2017.
I love that. Instead of deciding to do it, you just never decided not to do it.
Pretty much.
Perfect. I love that. So tell me about, we've probably covered some of this before, but let's talk about those years sort of before we met the first time, the 2017, 18, 19 years. Tell me about starting the brand. What were the biggest things you had to take care of, the biggest obstacles in the early years?
Honestly, the early years were easy because we produced wine, but we didn't have to start selling wine yet. So it was just kind of fun. We would have a lot to do during harvest, and then we spent a lot of time traveling during the off season. There was a lot of anxiety maybe that we knew that one of the biggest risks going into Corollary was that we would have this lag time and we would have to keep producing a few vintages before we started selling wine. And the risk was that we would hate selling wine because that's a real thing. A lot of winemakers really hate selling wine. And so we tried to keep production small for those first few years. I think you were more worried about it than I was.
Yeah, it's a fair amount of wine, and hopefully it's a product at the end of it that you really believe in, and there's a lot of faith and that goes into making sparkling wine over the process of 4 years, that it's going to result in the product that you dream about. And I remember opening the bottles for the first time, and like Jeanne's family came over and was like, "Oh my God, they don't suck!" And so it's like,
we were so happy.
We're very demanding, I think, of our wines and of ourselves, and so it's it was a big relief. But yeah, I mean, certainly, early on, the big focus was finding the right vineyards. How do what are the best vineyards for sparkling? We're still in the early days figuring that out, but I've taken a lot of those learnings here into our vineyards. We like these kind of cooler microclimates. We like later ripening clones that give us more hang time and more time to develop flavor. We like field blends. All of these things have kind of been learnings and hypotheses over the years that have been, I think, more or less playing out how we could only have dreamed.
Yeah.
So tell me about the process of learning to make sparkling wine for the two of you. What was the winemaking education process?
Oh man, some trial by fire. we had a lot of support. Willamette Valley is very supportive, community driven. So early on, even before we had ever made wine, a lot of the sparkling winemakers hosted us and tasted through base wines and explained their process. There was certainly a lot of equipment learning, like how do we run the big press.
How do we drive a forklift?
We had a lot of the theoretical knowledge, but we had not done
the hands-on stuff was. We did a couple of little test vintages in the years before we actually did our first Corollary vintage. So in 2015, we made some traditional method sparkling cider in our garage in San Francisco, just 5-10 cases of it. Learned a lot about apples from that, but we also learned that the process was interesting and fun. Also, the cider turned out pretty well, so we thought okay, maybe we're not terrible at this. So we tried with grapes. The next year, we got some Pinot Noir from Anderson Valley, and we had a friend who had an urban winery in San Francisco, and we made about 100 cases of sparkling there, and we made all the mistakes that season.
It was good to get them out of the way.
Wow. That wine, so the short version is that when we put the wine on tirage, we used a hand capper, and it turned out that the capper was faulty. And so while the bottles were on tirage, all of them leaked. And so we had to apply to the TTB for permission to dump them all. And that was a bad day, pouring out all that wine and recycling the bottles. But, good to get those mistakes out of the way.
What did you like about the work of winemaking, and what was surprising to you about the work of winemaking?
I like the rhythm of it. I like that it's a thing that happens once a year. You sort of track the season leading up to harvest. We're really meticulous about when we harvest. We visit each of the vineyards a bunch of times, and we really are you spend a lot of time observing the places that your fruit is from. And then each year, when the wine is in barrel, you start to see these through lines, the personality of each vineyard starts to come through. And I like that it's not just the same thing all year. It's not, full speed all year. There's kind of a period after harvest where we get to rest and recoup and think about things and, make some plans and think about what experiments do we want to build into the process next year. Because the flip side of this slower rhythm, this once a year harvest, is that, unlike the tech industry where you're iterating all the time and you get to try things all the time, we get one shot a year. And so we have to be really thoughtful about how what we're trying to learn each year.
Anything for you, Dan?
Yeah, I just love this taking this kind of very nebulous concept and turning it into something real. I mean, from start to finish, there's creativity involved at kind of every step of the process, and I don't know, it's just a really fun journey.
So we met in the depths of the pandemic in summer of 2020. You had just launched your brand, Excellent timing, of course. Tell us about that time for you. You finally have your product. You're very excited. Then the world changes. So tell me about sort of 2020 from your perspective and getting your wines to market.
Yeah, 2020 was awesome. So we had scheduled our launch party. It was supposed to be at the end of March 2020 at Amity in Portland, and we announced it, and like 2 days later, lockdown started. And so we had to, take it back. And we thought we will open our wine club anyways, because we didn't really have any other way to get the wine out into the world, and nobody had tasted it at that point. And so we opened the wine club and sort of started building our, friends and family wine club, which was great. So we sent out our first shipments, and then we just kind of started hitting social media and wholesale after that, because we didn't have any way to do tastings, and our stuff wasn't in any shops yet. And so we worked on really connecting with the local retail community. And so places like Red Hills Market and Trellis were incredibly helpful in helping us get things out there from the beginning. And they were super supportive from the beginning. It was really, really great.
Yeah, you can definitely tell early on people were excited by the idea of more bubbles coming out of this area, which was great validation. And then also we were talking to the folks at Winters Hill where we make our wine, and they allowed us to build a tasting patio up there, where kind of a temporary thing for us to host tastings, and that was started in 2021. And that was pretty transformative in terms of helping us really connect with people visiting the Willamette Valley and growing the club and being able to tell the story and see what resonated with people.
I think it also really changed the path we thought we were going to take, because our big plan out of the gate was that we were going to open a sparkling wine bar in downtown Portland. That was our big sales strategy. And then the pandemic happened, and we had been just about ready to sign a lease on a space in downtown Portland, and we didn't just in time. And then in 2021, when we're doing these tastings, sort of overlooking a vineyard, and they're very one-on-one, we're spending a lot of time with each guest, we realized that is the experience we wanted people to have with Corollary. And I personally realized that running a bar is absolutely my nightmare, and I would never want to do that. So thank God we didn't do it. But it kind of changed our trajectory in terms of where we thought the center of gravity of the business would be. We definitely still didn't have any ideas about having our own vineyard at that point, but it sort of sent us in this other direction, more focused on the valley.
Tell me about those days of getting your wine in front of people, especially in 2021, once you had the ability to host people even in a modified way. What were the reactions you were getting to the wine, and what excited you about the progress you had made?
I mean, people, as I said, people were excited. They're excited by this idea of more bubbles coming out of this area, and I think they're pretty happy about them. I think
a lot of people were surprised to discover that there were bubbles coming out of this area. There were a lot of light bulb moments, and it's really fun to witness those. And we still get a lot of people coming who don't know anything about traditional method. And so it's a lot of education goes into our tastings, and watching people sort of understand the process for the first time and be kind of amazed by it is really exciting. It's a really fun part for me.
Expand on that a little bit for me about the tasting. So take me through sort of a typical tasting and what you add to it.
Okay, so a tasting for us is, it's a very sort of personalized experience. And so we, now we're doing it here, but guests they sit, and we start them off with our Cuvée 1, which is our sort of flagship blend that's a snapshot of the vintage every year. It's a blend from many of the vineyards that we work with. And so the idea is we've chosen all these really specific sites that are great for farming for sparkling, and then this blend is a really unique expression of the valley because nobody else is doing that with these sparkling specific sites. So we kind of start them off talking just about like, why the Willamette Valley? Why are we doing sparkling here? Why is this the perfect place to be doing that? And then we get into some single vineyard wines.
Yeah, and single vineyard wines have like a little bit more age on them, and so it's a great opportunity to talk about how traditional method works. You know, why does this wine taste a little bit different? Why is it more rich, or why is there more nuttiness or brioche? And it's all that time on the lees, right? And do you understand the difference between that and, you know, how Prosecco is made or forced carbonation is made? And so it's just kind of this evolving narrative of both vineyards in process as we kind of go through and, you know, go through some of these single vineyards and then get into rosés and talk about, you know, how we craft those and how this is a little bit different. And
people ask a lot of questions during the tastings too. And one of the questions that a lot of them ask is like, hey, it looks like there's a lot more sparkling coming out around here. We've seen it at several wineries now, and they ask, like, am I right? Like, am I seeing more than I used to? And we talk about kind of why this is happening and why there are more producers able to make traditional method at this point, and, you know, why there will be more in the future.
So you talked about the change of growth plan, the idea of a Portland bar changing to something else. So let's talk about from that point to where we are now, up in the hills and outside Amity here. What were the steps? What were the leaps along the way, and how did this come to fruition?
Yeah. Well, so, you know, 2021, 2022, we were, you know, starting to really feel like, you know, getting our feet under us. We had some great vineyards. We kind of shown to ourselves and to people that, you know, they're producing good wine, and people are excited about it, and felt a little bit more confident. Also felt a little less confident because we realized our whole business is dependent on other people. And that if all those people change their mind at some point, yeah, maybe that's not great. But still very excited to work with those people. And then, you know, we were never really considering buying a vineyard, but we knew Jessica Cortell. She's a local farmer, viticulturist. She has her own company, does vineyard management. And she calls us up one day and it's like, because she lives on the hill right over that way, and it's like, oh, I saw that they cleared this piece of land and I know the owners. I used to race bikes with one of the guys, and so, of course.
What she said was, hey, you guys have to come see this vineyard property. And we were like, we're not looking for a vineyard.
Yeah.
Did you call the right person? No, thank you. And so we said no.
A lot of time.
But she called us a couple days later and said like the same thing. It's like she didn't even hear us the first time. And we said, no, we're not interested. So this happened a few times, and finally, and she just kept doing it. And so finally we said, whatever, fine, we'll go look at this just to get you off our backs. And so she told us where it was, and we've actually been sourcing fruit from Cattrall Brothers Vineyards, which is around the corner from here. It's less than a quarter mile away. We've been buying fruit there since 2017, and that vineyard was planted in 1972. It's one of the oldest vineyards in the valley, and it's just like, it was very intriguing that that would be like a 50-year fast forward on what our fruit could be. We knew that this would be the same soils that they have over there. These are, you know, really rocky volcanic soils up here, and so we were curious, and we'd also just never like been around the corner in the road, and so we were curious to see what was here. So we came down, and it was January 2022, and you know, it's January in Oregon. It was raining, it was muddy, it was gray, it was like not the best day to see any piece of property probably, but we pulled up and we saw sort of all these different aspects that could be for the vineyard, and we saw this ridge that we're sitting on right now. We saw all these Oregon oak trees that when they logged the property, they'd taken out the firs, but for whatever reason, they left some Oregon oaks here, which was really cool. And then we saw the view out behind where the tasting room would obviously go. And we just looked at each other before we got out of the car, and we were like, oh no. Here we go. So it took a few months to put everything together. The property wasn't actually for sale either. The family that owned it had owned the property for decades, and it was a group of siblings that we bought it from. They had planted the Douglas fir that had just been logged. They planted it with their father in the 70s. And so, just this family property, and they didn't really feel like waiting 40 years, I think, for another timber harvest. So they weren't really sure what to do with it, but Jessica had some ideas for them, so that's how it happened.
So after the process starts, tell me about what you sort of, as you start envisioning it in your head, what were the have-tos? What did you know this property had to have? Once you owned it, what did you have to put on it?
Well, it had to have a vineyard, and it had to have a tasting room, because we had been doing pop-up tastings basically since we started, and there are lots of land use reasons for this, but it's very difficult to have a legal place to pour your own wine. And so your two options are either basically like a storefront in a downtown district or on a vineyard property. And so had to have a vineyard, had to have a tasting room. So those two things were the priority.
Yeah, and I think we had realized over time that finding what we wanted for sparkling fruit was not super easy, because the way, the things that you might plant for, say, still Pinot especially, are a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And so we realized that being able to have this vineyard in the vineyard constructed how we wanted it could be a really, really great thing for us. So that was kind of top of mind as we started designing and whatnot. I mean, the other big thing was the permaculture side. And
yeah, so one of the first things I did during the pandemic was the permaculture design certificate at Oregon State. And so I had spent a lot of time studying how water gets circulated around and soaked into a landscape, and how you so I came to this with the frame of okay, we have all this terrain, we have an amazing resource in the rain that we get in Oregon, and so there's a real opportunity here to, design this in such a way that it sets the vineyard up for long-term success and also sets up the property in a really resilient way. So, the way that we sort of sculpted the roads around the bowl here around the vineyard has to do with how do you slow down the water coming down the hill? How do you prevent erosion? And then all of the structures that we have put on the property and that we will ever put on the property, we're doing rainwater capture on the roofs. And so the butterfly roof of our tasting room is actually sort of designed to show that to people. All the water flows down this sort of central channel, and then it flows through a pipe in the front wall. It gets piped down to the storage tanks down next to our barn to settle, and there's some treatment, water treatment facility in the barn, and then it gets pumped back up here. So all of our potable water on site is from rainwater capture.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I love that. So while we're talking about the building, let's talk about the building then. So you wanted a tasting room. Tell me how this came to be.
So we worked with Wechter Architecture out of Portland for this building. I did the interior design work. I have another company doing that on the side. And we just really wanted this to be a 3D experience of the Corollary brand. The red is the red from our label for Cuvée 1. It was Dan's excellent idea to take that color and put it on the building. I think the architect was not so excited about it at first. He was a little alarmed, but is totally on board now. I think when we said it's an architectural sort of, you see this on barns, red barns, right? And he was like, oh yeah, okay, maybe. But we wanted it to just, the brand is very, it's bold, it's young, it's supposed to be exciting and fresh, and so we wanted the building to be like that too. We also wanted to have most of our tasting space outside, because I think when we were doing the pop-up tastings at Winters Hill, people really loved being just sort of connected to the landscape right over the vineyard, but we wanted a little more sort of creature comforts than we had in the tent. So here we have heaters, infrared heaters in the roof, and then we also have these metal mesh screens that we can pull across all of the openings of the patio, which really block the rain and the wind, but they don't block the views. So.
Let's talk about the vineyard then. You mentioned obviously that was the other, you were excited about this as a vineyard space. So after kind of finding the fruit you were excited about, tell me about what goes into planting this site and what you're sort of, as you look ahead to the future, what it's going to be.
Oh, where to start?
So I think we were guided very much by what we learned from the vineyards that we've been working with since 2017. So some of the things Dan mentioned earlier are like mixed clone blocks.
Yeah, so co-planting a lot of different clones. You get more complexity, you get more resilience in the vineyard. We've very much shied away from things like some of the Pinot Dijon clones, which get very more like candied and floral, which we don't necessarily love in sparkling, all the time at least. And then we've also brought up things like all these champagne houses that have places in California had brought in all these clones to the nurseries there, but they're not really planted anywhere. So we have like a mixed clone block of like 13 different champagne clones. And we're going to be doing some trials and experiments to kind of see what happens. And hopefully that works out. Lots of Pinot Meunier here because Pinot Meunier does amazing things here in the Willamette Valley, and there's very little planted. And also a little bit of Pinot Blanc, because over the years we've learned we love Pinot Blanc. It's very floral and vibrant and just adds this whole other dimension to sparkling wine.
So how many acres planted?
We have about 13 planted right now. The whole property is 57 acres. A large part of it is this steep western slope, which is mostly oak forest, and so we're doing habitat preservation back there, about 25 acres. This section in the middle was the first that we planted, and we want to learn as much as we can from this, but the property also includes 10 acres across the road that we cleared but haven't planted yet, where we could expand. So see what the future brings.
I'm curious about the process of putting in a vineyard. What was the learning curve like for you for putting in a vineyard?
Oh. It's a lot of talking to contractors. We worked with some great people, advanced land management. This whole place was just stumps. So they spent a lot of time just ripping out stumps and then...
And the reason... Well, we spent about a year prepping the soil before we started planting. Yeah. The reason it took so long, I think it was two reasons. One was that this used to be Douglas fir, and Douglas fir roots can have armillaria on them, which infects grapevines, and so you have to take it out down to 12, 18 inches in the soil. And so they had to kind of comb through everything, which as a permaculture person was kind of hard for me to watch, but you do it once and hopefully you're good. So there was that part, but then there was also the fact that it's so rocky up here. And so we have rock piles everywhere. So if you need rocks, you're welcome to them. You just have to move them yourself.
Yeah.
So you talked earlier about sort of the design behind the tastings here. So tell me about once you opened up, I'm curious, what were your expectations for the space and how has it gone so far having this space?
I mean, our expectations, our hope was that people would come, and people came, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a great pleasure to host so many people from all over the world, and I think people have liked it.
Yeah. I mean,
they come back.
Yeah, it's also just been a real luxury after doing 3 years of pop-ups to we used to have to carry our glass racks down a hill and up a hill to do dishes, and now I just walk through the door and the glass washer's right there. It's the nicest thing. It's the small things, but they're important.
So looking ahead for this space, then tell me about things you haven't done here yet that you want to, or what the future of the tasting room is.
That's a great question. We're trying to kind of take it slowly and, not add too many things all at once. So, I mean, I don't know. I have visions of tree houses. We're putting in a pond this summer. I think is the big construction thing for the year. So that'll be part of our water system where the the storage tanks that we have now will overflow to the pond, and so that'll be sort of our reservoir, source of emergency water if we need it, sort of adding to the resilience of the site, which is super exciting. We also have, we have a lot of directions we could go. So we do rotational grazing here. We work with Jared Lloyd from Naked Grazing. He brings a herd of sheep and goats, and they rotate kind of around the property a few times a year to help us with weed management. People love the sheep and goats. We love the sheep and goats. So I could see maybe, coming up with more ways for people to interact with them going forward. And I think that's like one of the most exciting things for me is kind of getting to explain to people why it's important that animals are part of our system and that they're like an indispensable part of the system. They're key to making the whole thing work. So really happy that we were able to get that going in year one. But I'd love to do more education around it.
You mentioned earlier that the growth of sparkling is something that people keep bringing up. So let's talk about Method Oregon coming up in a few weeks here. I know you're part of the drive for that. So let's talk about how the idea came about and sort of the lead up to the first event.
Yeah, so when we started Corollary, we always had this idea that like we need to work with other producers to really promote this as a category that people should care about, right? If we believe that Willamette Valley in Oregon can make really world-class sparkling, but how many people outside of Oregon have even tasted it or thought about that? And so, much like the early pioneers did, we've always thought, we can work together to kind of do something here. And I think this goes back to the earliest days of Corollary. I found this in the email. It's like in 2018 we were talking about Method Oregon over email, but the industry doesn't seem necessarily quite ready, nor were we ready to be honest back then. And so that kind of has just been slowly simmering. And there's there's a lot of talk. People were starting to realize that we should be working together. Mm-hmm. And then Andy Lytle called us up in January this year. And he was like, we need to do an event this year.
Well,
right.
I think there were many things that converged for this year to be the year to really get Method Oregon going. Part of it was that IPNC, unfortunately, wasn't going to be happening this year. And so the last weekend of July was available. And so that's a big opportunity. That's a perfect time for people to travel here. And the conversations among sparkling makers had been kind of, happening in various configurations. We'd all been talking to each other about, having some kind of more formal coordination over the years. But I don't know, it was sort of the convergence of the last weekend of July, and then those conversations among producers really seemed to start converging. It felt like there was enough enthusiasm and engagement at this point to pull it together.
Enough people making sparkling.
Enough SKUs, enough volume. Part of it is that you need to be making enough volume to get the wine out of one, your tasting room, and two, out of the state. Mm-hmm. And so, just the volumes that have been produced had climbed to the point where that was possible. So decided to go for it.
So let's talk about the preparation for the event then. Obviously choosing a space, inviting people, all of those things. How did you kind of narrow in on what exactly you wanted it to be?
Yeah, so we had been working, or are working very closely with Andy Lytle on this as kind of early days, and he's like, we should call Jim at Willamette Valley Vineyards, because they have an awesome space, and now they have Domain Willamette, and that could be a potential huge thing for kind of anchoring the event. So calls them up, and Jim was very excited by the idea and graciously offered their space and team to help plan, and that was kind of like, okay, things are happening now. And it happened very quickly, matters of days. We were kind of putting this together and getting an announcement together, working with, to get a logo, get a website up.
Get all the producers on board.
And, getting all the producers on board and excited. And, everybody was really excited by the idea and, really enthusiastic. And so it's been a lot of work, but it feels like everybody's kind of swimming together with it.
And so it's 22 producers this year. And there are something like 100 wineries in the state of Oregon making some traditional method sparkling in, like, not even necessarily every year, but like some, so probably 100. But to get to 22, we really thought about focusing on the wineries that make enough, that make it every year, that, the ones that have sort of the best chance of getting the wine out into the world right now. And so this year it's wineries that make at least 2 SKUs every year, 500 cases of traditional method. Everything is aged on tirage at least 15 months. And so that was just a way of like narrowing down this year to the number of wineries that can fit in the space that we have.
And you've structured the day interestingly with a kind of a 2-part event. So let's tell me about the morning event and what you're sort of hoping out of that part of the day.
Yeah, so the day starts with a panel. It's going to be moderated by Julia Coney, who's amazing, and then it'll be Roland Souls, founding winemaker of Argyle and now of Rocco, Andrew Davis, who founded Radiant, and Kate Payne-Brown, who is the new head winemaker at Argyle. And so the idea was we wanted to sort of focus on the pioneers and innovators of Oregon sparkling wine. Obviously, Roland was like the pioneer. Without everything that he did to get the ball rolling here, none of us would be here. And we owe him a huge debt. And then he also, Andrew worked with him at Argyle, and Andrew has been absolutely foundational to getting everything going because he's enabled so many wineries to make sparkling with his services at Radiant. And, Kate has made sparkling at many wineries and now is going to be sort of leading the charge for Oregon's largest producer of traditional method sparkling. So she's really got a hand in shaping the future. So, we wanted to give people a little bit of a behind-the-scenes glimpse. I don't think Roland spends a lot of time doing this kind of event anymore, but it was really exciting to be able to, have him in conversation with everybody else.
Unleash him on the world a little bit.
Yep.
And then the afternoon part of the event.
Yeah, the afternoon is going to be the grand tasting. We've got 22 producers coming, all traditional method. They'll be pouring between 2 and 4 wines each, so it's going to be a ton of fun and an amazing chance to taste just an incredible amount of wines that are incredibly high quality.
So with that as the kind of the first year plan, you mentioned obviously a certain number of producers, a certain amount of space. If the event is successful, I guess what will make the event a success? What are the biggest things you want people to take away from this event?
One of the things that we really talked a lot about with the sort of the group planning the event is that it needs to have an education component. We need people to walk away from the day knowing more about Oregon traditional method wine than they did. So, I think just tasting all of those wines together is a huge sort of way to understand what's happening here. But then all the winemakers are going to be there pouring the wine. So people have direct access to, ask questions and that kind of thing. We have some other educational pieces. We produced a video with Som TV that sort of is a really beautiful overview of the history and sort of future path of Oregon sparkling. So that'll play a part in the event. And Thomas Hausman is going to do some sort of live walkthroughs of the traditional method process, which I think will be a really fun, interactive way for people to learn about how it's done.
But the idea is also, I think, bigger than just the event itself. Like, even if you never come to the event, we want you to hear about Method Oregon. We want you to know that this is a thing, and that's kind of the ultimate dream behind Method Oregon, is that it becomes not just an event, but a category and almost a brand for Oregon sparkling that raises awareness and it becomes something people want to taste and explore.
Yeah, I think the long-term vision is that this starts sort of planting the seeds for everybody in the world, knowing that the Willamette Valley and Oregon writ large is a destination for world-class sparkling wine. We want people traveling to Oregon seeking out sparkling wine.
Which we're starting to see now. I had a couple groups at the taster room this week, just doing sparkling wine for the weekend.
Nice.
So.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a whole new category. I think it's great for, not just consumers, but it's a whole new area of growth for the valley, and it brings in a different audience than Pinot or Chardonnay drinkers. Certainly there's some overlap, but it just expands the base and the variety of people that we talk to, which is awesome.
So on that note, obviously, been a lot of growth in that category since you started in the last few years. Tell me about as you kind of look at the Oregon sparkling wine scene at the moment. What does it look like right now? What are the sort of the biggest strengths and characteristics of it? And what does the growth look like for Oregon sparkling wine?
Well, this isn't unique to sparkling in Oregon, but collaboration among producers is and has been so important for all of us. We do behind the scenes things like technical tastings every year where, the winemakers get together and we, have these sort of constructed flights where there's kind of a question behind the flight and everybody tastes blind, and we learn a lot from each other through those discussions. People bounce back and forth and taste each other's base wines in the winery all the time. And I think the collaboration piece will continue to be something that, allows us all to keep learning.
Numbers-wise, we kind of estimate that collectively everybody makes around about 150,000 cases of traditional method now. And that's probably triple from where it was a decade or 15 years ago. Part of that's because of Radiant and the equipment and just growing interest. So I think there's lots of potential for growth. We are very boutique. We're not making some wineries out in California make much more on a much bigger scale. I don't know if that will ever be Oregon. So we'll never be kind of the $20 bottle of bubbles in the grocery store, but I think that's okay. I think we've got something different to say. We've got these unique vineyards, and we've got some incredibly talented winemakers and some great stories.
And I think, you're starting to see more investment in the infrastructure that wineries need for sparkling. So, Vinovate just acquired Radiant, and that's a huge validator. They'll be growing that business that makes riddling and disgorging services available to a lot of new wineries, because Andrew had capped his client list a couple of years ago. He was at capacity, and so that sort of opens up again for more people to get into the market. Kenny and Allison at Arabilis also invested in their own equipment, and so they're helping to expand capacity as well. And when you see people making those decisions that really are sort of like the enabling factors for everyone else, I think it just invites more players into the market, which is great.
Look ahead for the two of you a little bit. We talked about the space and kind of where the brand might be going, but what about the two of you? Anything else personally, professionally that you're excited about or on your horizon?
I'm real excited about that pond.
I can almost see it now.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, I'm excited about the pond partly because it's like the completion of the water system, and also partly because it gets really hot up here in the summer and I want to go for a swim. And then also partly because this, okay, I've said this to you before. So we source fruit from Momtazi Vineyard, which the block that we work with is called the Pinot Patch. It's kind of like in the second valley of the property, and it overlooks Mo's big, beautiful fishing pond. And that just like, that scene with the vineyards all around and the pond and like the sun coming up behind it has always been my platonic ideal of a beautiful vineyard. And now we're gonna have it right here. I'm so excited.
I love that.
I thought you were going to tell me you wanted to fish in it like they fish in Mo's pond.
I don't want to stock it with fish. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Maybe we need it for the system, but I don't. Unless we can put some McFarland trout in there.
Yeah. Might be a little challenging. Yeah.
Anything else for you, Dan?
I was going to say, you know, be able to take a vacation in the summer again, but I don't know.
That's a few years off.
That might be a few years.
That sounds great, but yeah, it might be a while. Yeah, I don't know. I think we had so many years of just like, things were very different one year to the next, and every year was something huge and new. And now we get to sort of like just, you know, use the infrastructure we have built for ourselves, which is kind of nice.
A lot of growth. Let's, you know, get things on good, you know, stable
and then
long-term footing.
In a couple years, we're going to have a whole bunch of new fruit coming online. So I think it's going to be really fun to see, you know, what we can learn from this vineyard and start figuring out kind of the results of the experiments we've designed. Yeah.
All right. All the questions that I have today for the two of you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about today?
I can't think of anything.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
once
much.
again. Yes, thank you for
Thank you.
sitting down with us again. Congratulations on this new beautiful space. We appreciate you taking the time to share the updated story with us. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.